the way we're going to play it is we've got the lovely Jenny with us. So, Jenny, you're going to take us through all the excitement that's been happening in the mortgage world, aren't you? So, and I know
Yeah,
it's an exciting world, isn't it? So,
every day is just a treat, honestly.
so over to you.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're keeping really well. Got some nice plans for the lovely long weekend. So I was thinking about what to kind of update you on, and the thing that is really kind of pressing in my world at the moment is what's happening with interest rates. So what's essentially going on is mortgage rates are going up. You know, the base rate has gone up and mortgage pricing is simply following suit. And what's quite interesting, I think, is people are generally quite surprised at the moment when they contact us for interest rates and are saying, oh, you were quoting me something much lower 3 weeks ago, and things are moving really, really at quite a pace just now. So where we are right now is that base rate is currently sitting at 0.75%, but I think more relevantly to anyone who's thinking about taking a mortgage out in the future is what's happening with swap rates. And swap rates are the rates at which banks lend each other money and therefore determine how much the interest rate will be that mortgage lenders will offer to you. So 5-year swap rates today are at 2.15%. 2 years ago, they were at less than 0.3%. So things have really increased massively. What's driving this? Well, obviously, there's lots of kind of issues with regards to the with inflation. We've also got, you know, a strong level of unemployment, and all these things kind of factor into the interest rates. Bank of England's pushing base rate up to try and slow down consumer spending. It's all going on, and the knock-on effect of this is that, which is a bit that really kind of impacts you guys, is that mortgage rates are now climbing up quite rapidly. So we have base rate being reviewed again in May. Last time on checking, the city had an over 120% prediction of base rate going up. We're expecting it to go up by 25 basis points. The base rate will be sitting at 1% at that point. Looking at the kind of predictions across the industry, the expectation is that base rate will end up at about 1.5% by the end of this year. People are thinking that base rate increases based on what we're seeing at the moment are probably going to cap out. So we're going to end up at around 2%, and then it won't go any further than that. And the reasons for this is that actually keep putting up interest rates. That's not what's really driving inflation at the moment. Actually, what's really killing inflation for everybody is the cost of fuel and sort of exterior costs to just people spending on sort of nice things. It's not about treats. Actually, we're all just struggling to kind of pay our day-to-day bills just now, and that's really where inflation's hitting the hardest. So increase in base rate is expected. And so how this is going to then knock on is the pricing to the mortgage market. So lender fixed rates are not inextricably linked to base rate, but there is a kind of connection. So what we're seeing is, in terms of lender pricing, as I've mentioned, things have gone up. But there's really two types of lender, I think. So there's kind of the clearing banks, which are the people like your Santanders, your Barclays, those kinds of institutions. And these guys are the people who lend money very, very cheaply. And then you've got the more specialist lenders, who are people like Precise Mortgages, Kent Reliance, Paragon. And these guys are more expensive because they operate in a more specialist end of the market. So with the clearing banks, who are lending with the really small margins, cheaper interest rates, they're very, very kind of exposed to the change in swap rates. So what we've seen is that these guys are changing their pricing all the time. So Accord Mortgages, the part of the Yorkshire Building Society as an example, have repriced every single week for the last 6 weeks. They're really struggling to kind of keep up with the cost of funds. Now, the specialist lenders are slightly more cushioned because they charge higher margins. They can absorb a sort of variation in the cost of funds in the money markets. And these guys are all citing that they're going to be increasing their interest rates by up to 0.25% by the end of April. So I'm giving you a bit of insider information there to let you know what these guys are planning. So I suppose the message really is that actually mortgage rates now, so on a personal buy-to-let, 5-year fixed rates are now from 2.15%. Limited company buy-to-lets are now from 2.7%, which, when you compare to what we've been sort of talking about in months gone by, where the rates were sub 2%, probably feels really, really expensive. Now, actually, I still think the rates are quite good. I mean, I think we've all probably been around for quite a while. And I can remember saying to clients pre-credit crisis, when interest rates were kind of more normal and stayed, that actually, if you can fix for 5 years at under 5%, you've got yourself a really good deal. And that kind of actually is, in normal times where pricing sits. So really, if you can get a 5-year fix at 2.15, actually, really, it's not that bad. It just feels expensive to what you're used to in an artificial environment. So I think the message really is actually, if you are in the market for a mortgage and really remortgaging, you can apply for a mortgage. If you're on a fixed rate and it doesn't end for up to really 8 months, you can lock in the rate now. And then because of the mortgage offer duration being up to 6 months, you can kind of make it work. So anyone who's got a mortgage or a remortgage due up in the next 8 months, you need to get in there really, really quick, because pricing, I promise you, is only going one direction. Now, in terms of other news from the lenders, so what are they doing? So we are seeing a fair amount of tweaking on lenders' criteria at the moment. So they're obviously looking at the market. They're thinking that things might get a little bit quiet for the lenders. They've been very spoiled over the last 12 months because the housing market has been super busy, because the cost of borrowing has been really, really low. So it's been a strong purchase market and a strong remortgage market. But the purchase market is going to start slowing down. So these guys are really eyeballing the future and thinking, well, how are we going to continue to lend at volume? So they're starting to really start changing their criteria. So, for example, we're seeing lots more lenders go into 80% loan to value lending. Holiday lets is another big one that people seem to be moving into. And also for those lenders who have been lending to HMOs up to, say, 6 bedrooms, we've seen quite a few of them now increase their criteria to absorb 8 bedrooms or 10 bedrooms or 10 self-contained units. There's quite a lot of lenders now starting to kind of turn to their criteria and try and win business that way by broadening things rather than just, you know, cheap interest rates. Other than that, I think the only other thing that I really kind of wanted to share with you is at the moment, the lenders are quite slow to deal with. It's quite painful. So if you do want a mortgage in the near future, give yourself a very generous window of time. We are finding things quite slow and quite painful. We've got a lot of frustrated clients at the moment, which isn't great for them and it's not great for us, but it kind of is what it is. So yeah, I think that will kind of work itself out. I think there's a lot of lenders who have struggled with a surge in quick remortgage applications, and also there's been a massive wave of COVID, so people off sick as well. So I think we'll get over that, but at the moment it is just a bit sticky. And that is really the mortgage market where we are today. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Jenny. You said about mortgage rates going up. I mean, there's an awful lot of us here today. You can remember mortgage rates of 15% and more. So
that's what I find funny when people are like, oh my God, the rate's 2.25%. You think, it's not actually that bad, really. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Jenny, I've got a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I saw something that was on maybe last week about the fact that normally the difference between 2 and 5 year fixed rates, whereas 2 years actually higher. Is that correct? I haven't looked at in that detail.
So what we've seen is there are 2 year fixed rates which are cheaper than 5 year fixed rates, but a lot of lenders have pulled their 2 year fixed rates at the moment, where they're obviously struggling to secure their pricing on the wholesale market. So I think I would say that's not strictly true, but on occasion you may find that's actually the case. What has certainly kind of become closer is the difference between 2 and 5 year fixed rates at the moment. There's much less of a gap just now. We know that borrowers tend to favour 5 year fixed rates at the moment because obviously people are kind of trying to now lock in for longer periods of time for elongated certainty. And also the other thing is a lot of borrowers have to take 5 year fixed rates by default because they need that more generous rental calculations. There's just more demand for 5 year fixes at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Well, thank you very much. We don't seem to have any more questions. So, well, thank you for that, Jenny. I don't know if you're staying with us to listen to Richard, or
can I be awfully rude and duck out? Do you mind? So I'm trying to get sorted before the Easter weekend and I'm not doing very well, I'm afraid.
You'll probably take it personally, but anyway.
Please don't. Please don't.
No, well, thanks so much for your time, Jenny, and do have a good Easter weekend.
Lovely to see you all. Enjoy yourself.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks.
Okay,
bye.
Bye. Just before we go on to Richard, just want to mention a couple of things which have come up in this last week, actually, about the Section 21. One is some of you may be aware that there was a case a couple of years ago where it's a long, complicated thing, but it boiled down to you had to ensure that you served the gas certificate before anyone started a new tenancy. That's been battered around in courts, and it's finally got resolved in the Supreme Court, where they've ruled that you don't, if you don't serve the if you don't serve the gas certificate before they occupy, it won't stop you doing a Section 21. Now, we're not changing our recommendations to say to people, we strongly recommend that you do serve it before they occupy, because, you know, it seems a sensible thing to keep it in there. The other one is something which came up through Shelter, actually. Shelter have picked up on a court case which was unreported, which basically says if you've got more than one person on your agreement and you wish to do a Section 21, you must name all the tenants on the Section 21, but you only need to serve it on one of them. Now, as Shelter has said, this is an unreported court case, and although I know the name of the court case, it is indeed unreported. So I have to take Shelter's words for it. And again, it seems sensible that if you're doing a Section 21, make sure you put everybody on there. So all this will be in the weekly news next week, so which hopefully you'll all see. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Richard in his pied terre there. And Richard, hopefully you can share your screen with us, and away you go.
Let's give it a go, Peter.
Yeah, we can see that. So
click it over to full view. Try again.
That's it. Yes, you're fine.
You should better see it.
Yeah, that's fine.
But okay, cool. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Bowser, the editor of Property Investor News magazine, and apologies to any of you who were on the aborted webinar a week or so ago with the tech gremlins, and hopefully we'll continue smoothly with this one. Fingers crossed. Right, so I've got a fair bit to present as usual, so let's just whiz through. The dodo bird is the emblem or the graphic I've always had since George Osborne decided to introduce the dreaded Section 24 and then the extra 3% on stamp, which obviously has had an impact on the market in the last 6 years. So it's about, the graphic is all about adapting to a changing environment, which the dodo bird obviously didn't. So there we are. Right, so if you're not familiar, I'm sure most of you are. We launched Property Investor News 20 years ago now. We've got 16,500 articles in our website archive. Subscribers can access it via their password. A whole batch of webinar presentations on specific topics. We've got one upcoming a week on Monday about creative acquisitions with Tariq, talking about some very clever projects with, and Tariq is a solicitor as well as a property entrepreneur. So this is a series of articles we've been doing in the magazine, and we're following it up with a webinar to talk through some of these where property's been bought with very creative techniques. So all of those webinars are recorded and in the archive. Right, what have we covered recently? Literally just put the April magazine to print yesterday. So I'll just run through very quickly what we covered in the March magazine. We looked at the student sector, and I had a very encouraging email from a long-term subscriber just saying how useful he found that article, where we focus on demographic trends for the student sector and the investment outlook. And as I'm sure some of you are aware, the student sector has been, or student sector landlords have been under pressure for a while now because of all of the purpose-built stuff that's been built, but also because of falling demographics. And that's now about to change. There are going to become, as we outlined in much greater detail in the article, student numbers are going to rise. And obviously this hasn't been lost on some of the providers of the purpose-built sector, which is why you've seen such growth in these blocks being built in certain places in recent years. We also looked at oil, inflation, interest rates and mortgage traps, and it was interesting listening to what Jenny said. So that was a very interesting article with quite some very interesting conclusions with my colleague who wrote that, comparing the period in the 1990s from about 1990 to 95 and how inflation impacted on the property market then. We looked at conversions for profit, i.e. taking on commercial building and adapting it for residential or for mixed use and doing that as a buy to sell approach. We looked at property development. That's a series of articles. We looked at product delivery, so all about physically building a development project, but also how they, in terms of the actual delivery of it. We looked at commercial property, hotel investments. We've been doing a series of articles on planning with David Kemp, our resident sort of planning consultant, and he looked at the Class MA approach to permitted development and talk through readers about that. And then finally, one of these articles that I've mentioned above in respect of the webinar, and this was looking at title splits. I'm sure most of you will be very aware of that approach, whereby you can take property or piece of land and then split it title, and then add value.
You've gone very soft, Richard.
Yeah,
we can't hear you properly.
Okay.
No, still can't hear you properly, afraid.
I can hear you clearly.
No, you were fine.
Yeah. Any luck now?
No.
Check the slide. Can
That's
you
it.
that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know whether it's your end or my end, but anyway. So just talking more about the broader market. So that's what we covered in the recent magazine. And this slide really is just, what are your options? I mean, obviously most of you or all of you are long-term landlords. I'm well aware of that. But what are some people doing in this marketplace? Well, I do single lets. I don't do HMOs. That's what I do, and I've been doing for 30 years. Lots of people do the HMO approach, shared accommodation. Lots of people, as Jenny just alluded to, there's increasing demand for the furnished holiday let market. And I know that obviously because of COVID, a lot of people got into that a couple of years ago. Serviced accommodation, i.e., furnished, ready to move in to short lets, etc. Or some people do it for longer periods. Obviously, COVID impacted that. And of course, as we came out of the COVID first lockdown, and last year in particular, lots of people did very, very well with the furnished holiday let sector. And that certainly is a boom sector this year, which is why lots of people have been diving in to invest in furnished holiday let accommodation. I'm starting to hear tales of potential oversupply. And also the other factor, of course, which might change that very optimistic phase that's gone through, the holiday let sector has gone through in the last year and a half, is that obviously this year we're now seeing obviously lots of people getting on airplanes and flying away, albeit not without some serious hassles because of the shortages of staff at airports and what have you. But so that's what, that's just a take. Obviously city centres are recovering. I'm going to talk about that again in a minute. So those doing serviced accommodation for business lets, short lets or whatever, or for overseas contractors, etc. That started to recover. Social housing leases, again, that's sort of a topic that a lot of people have been diving into, purely for security of income, but also for less hassle, in theory at least. But we've been hearing some horror stories now for the last couple of years in some of the organisations taking over landlords' properties on leases. And it's not been going too well for some people. Historically, commercial property, a great strategy for those looking for a long-term income, but obviously the whole commercial property world has been turned upside down because of COVID. And a lot of people are into commercial property at the moment, not for the income, but for the profit, or at least the profit in theory, by taking on commercial property at low per square feet values for commercial property usage, but then turning them into residential. And that's what a lot of my subscribers have been doing in the last 3, 4, 5 years. But now what I'm hearing and seeing is just as the office conversions boom that took place from sort of 2015 to 2017, owners have woken up to this quite some time ago now, and demanding quite high prices, and consequently the profit margins aren't there anymore. And I'm starting to hear that's exactly the case in the retail sector, where lots of people have been piling into retail property because of the impact of COVID, and some of the the stuff's not adding up anymore, or it's questionable. Planning and development, yeah, great. You know, that it can work really, really well. I'll show you a case study at the end of how it can work really well. Yeah. Okay, so just touched on some of this stuff already, but what's changed in the last 2 years with COVID? Well, obviously the whole Zoomification, and we're doing it now. People working from home. My stepdaughter works for an organisation in central London. Some of her colleagues have moved way out of London, even though the office is in London, and they don't want to come back. One of them's down in Cardiff, one of them's down in Ramsgate in Kent, and the offices are in Westminster. And so there's you know, so this has impacted people. They're all millennials. They all want, you know, pretty much everything on a plate. Being generalistic here, but that you know, that seems to be it. So the question is, where do people want to live and work now compared to 4 months ago? Is this going to change? Obviously going to impact big time if these trends continue. But in my opinion, I think we're going to see gradual return to what we regard as the normal. I was in central London this morning. You know, there's huge amounts of traffic back out there now. Shops are full, offices maybe not so much. Canary Wharf in East London, still not back to where it was in terms of office usage. But in terms of what people then do in terms of living and renting, which is us as landlords, what we're interested in, absolutely during COVID, there was a real trend for people moving out of inner London and inner Birmingham and inner Manchester and going to the outer suburbs, but also looking to move to commuting towns, not just to buy, but also to rent. So, you know, lots of young people in London paying quite high rents decided actually they'll either go back to mum and dad, and now they're only working maybe a day or two a week in the cities. They're reworking out what they're going to be doing. So space has been at a premium. Absolutely, this is well and truly documented. Green space is more valued, and of course, within homes, those people working from home need that internal space. I mean, my daughter is a school teacher with 3 children. Thankfully, she's got a decent sized house with a decent sized garden, but she still found that quite trying. So as an experience, both working from home and having your children on the laptops or whatever during the whole lockdown phases. But now we've moved on from that, thankfully, and hopefully not to be repeated. But people are, you know, looking more at the home stroke study conversion and what have you. In terms of internal space within their properties. Okay, so that's just some thoughts there. Just looking at the bigger picture stuff. Did a couple of shows recently, one at Billingsgate and one at Excel, the property shows. And this is some of the stuff that I touched on, which, you know, when you think about where we're at, and obviously most of this is being touched on in the national press on a daily basis, particularly at the moment. Government spending is at wartime levels due to COVID. Rishi Sunak, obviously, the huge billions and billions that he threw at the economy, threw at us as workers, as businesses, with all the bounce back loans, the CBIL loans, the furlough schemes. I mean, compared to what the government did in 2008, 2009, as a response to the financial crash, what they've done this time is really, you know, I call it digital confetti. But of course, you know, that has an impact, and we've been seeing that impact now for quite a while. Obviously, government wants a bit of inflation because they've got, I think, 25% of the government debt is not fixed, so therefore they're at the mercy of the market, the lending market. If that debt starts to cost them more and more in terms of repayments. And of course, as Jenny's alluded to just now in her mortgage talk, we've got inflation to some extent. You could argue it's getting out of control a little bit. If you believe the official figures, then you probably believe in tooth fairy, etc. But I would say probably we're north of 10% certainly in terms of real inflation in reality compared to the official figures that are still around 70%. We're all very, very aware now, obviously, that energy and fuel costs rising rapidly, and we've got about what are the consequences of that. Diesel usage, we touched on this in a recent article in the magazine. It's far more profound than talking about the cost of fuel. A lot of diesel is produced in exported from Russia and Ukraine, so it's not the price of the pump petrol, it's more the cost of diesel. So all of these things are prompting lots of brighter minds than I to comment about, are we heading back to a stagflation period, back to the sort of experience we had in the 1970s. Now, that's the sort of broader picture. Turning to residential property, what are we seeing? Well, 2 years ago, many people, including myself, expected a market downturn across the UK, with the average property reducing in price by between 5 and 15%. That was a fairly common forecast by many people at the beginning of the first lockdown, and as we entered into this period. But of course, what we didn't expect was this huge amount of government support for the economy. So since July 2020, we've obviously experienced a very increasingly buoyant property market, residential, across much of the UK. And the latest data that's probably not even yet hit any media headlines is the latest data from RICS that was put out yesterday. I'm not even sure if it's under embargo or not yet. It may well be, but I don't think I'm going to be contradicting the embargo if I can tell you that it's showing very strong demand for residential property still, and on the rental side, increasingly low rental supply. And that, of course, only has one consequence. As demand is increasing, household formation is increasing, so rents are going up quite quickly. Obviously, some of you might contradict that because you're in a particular part of the country. That may not be the case, but across the UK, that is actually anecdotally, not just anecdotally, but evidenced by RICS and their commentary, as well as Rightmove also put some stuff out yesterday as well. So absolutely. Very strong demand for residential property for people to buy, and residential property for people to let. And of course, on the supply side, we're seeing this continuing of under delivery, partly because of COVID, partly because of the long-term factors, which have meant that we're just not producing enough housing for the ongoing increase in household formation every year. That's the residential market trends. I think I've mentioned most of this already. So of course the key question is, if we've got inflation at around 8-10% over the next 12 months, and those are the official figures, can you increase your rents or your income from your salaried occupation? If you're in salaried occupation, can you increase your income by 8-10% this year ahead in order to stand still? Because inflation is going to decrease the purchasing power of the pound in your pocket, to use Harold Wilson's phrase from many years back. Okay, so Rishi in his spring statement said we're going to be the beneficiaries of a 1 pence decrease in income tax in 2 years' time. But of course, that's well and truly swallowed up, even though we won't be the beneficiaries of that for 2 years. We've now got the reality of upcoming national insurance rises, which are more than the 1 pence in the pound. What we should also know is that a typical chancellor will try and sneak things in, and it's exactly the same with the Treasury, because this year we're going to have 1.2 million more people dragged into the higher rate tax band. So we've got fiscal drag there, which is going to result in an extra £30 billion in tax receipts for the Treasury this year. Yes, the outlook is more positive ahead, despite some of the things that I've already said. And we can probably anticipate that next year's spring statement, we'll see some rabbits being pulled out of the hat by Mr. Sunak, if he's still in office, and in order just in time for the 2024 general election. Right, so just going back to some of the stuff that we need to be thinking about. It's a long game, I'm sure you're all aware of this. There are cycles, and the cycles are not always predictable, as we found out recently with the financial crash, and then Brexit, which disproportionately affected the London market, and of course now COVID. Most of you probably are not in buying mode, I guess. I might be wrong now, but most of you are probably, you've got your portfolios and it's about management day to day. and tweaking around the edges. But how likely is capital growth over the next 10 years, and why is what I say to people who are in purchasing mode. How much research have you done into the local economy? How secure is the employment base? Aberdeen, not so good because of the decline in the oil and gas industry. Swindon, somewhere in between, because of the closure of the Honda car factory, which has impacted about 9,000 jobs there. And Sunderland, where I've got investments myself in and around that area, where it was looking a bit sticky, but now Nissan, another major car manufacturer, have reinforced their commitment to the Sunderland economy, and they're expanding. So that's good, which then obviously impacts on people's jobs, people's earnings, and that flows through into house prices and ability to people to rent and buy. So just as a little thing now, I put at the bottom on this slide, where was the best place to invest in 2007? And you may well be surprised about this. So if you could turn back the clock some 15 years to 2007, and I said to you, out of 420 locations in the UK, which location would you have been best to put your money into in terms of capital growth? And you may well be surprised to know that it's Hastings. Hastings, the #1 location in terms of capital growth between 2007 and 2022. I found that out the other week. That's from Home Track data, by the way. This is more up-to-date Home Track data, and it's their top 20 cities index. I use that. I've been using this in my talks for quite some time. For whatever reason, Home Track are not up to date with their data. So the data that I was promised literally a week ago it would be ready, but it's still not available. They normally do this on a monthly basis. So this is the data up until the end of, so the 31st of December. So it's three and a bit months out of date. But you can see the trends. The trends are at where it says trough, that's the trough of the market, which was mid-2009. And where it says peak to current, you can see my cursor moving around, hopefully. The peak was the middle of 2007. So that was the end of the last cycle, and the trough was the beginning of the cycle, which we are still, notwithstanding COVID, on a national level seeing. These are the trends in the last 12 months, city by city, and these are the price trends of the average property. So that includes all property types in each major city in the UK, determined by population size. Brighton isn't in there, but there are other locations not a million miles away from you on the south coast. And you can see the last 12 months trend, you can see the last 3 months trend, and and obviously when I say the last 3 months, this is from December going backwards, not from now. Hopefully in the next week or two, Home Track will put this data up on their website, and you can go and have a look at it if you are so minded. The evidence is pretty clear that the top performing location was, and as I say, this is major cities, so it doesn't include Hastings, just I should add. Yeah, the major price growth has occurred in Cambridge, followed by Bristol, which has been a strong outperformer for quite some time, Oxford, and obviously London, and then a whole smattering of other locations, different phases. Aberdeen being the absolute worst performer, where actually prices in Aberdeen at the end of December last year were minus 3.3% below where they were in 2000 and 2007. And if you take into account the fact that there's been substantial inflation in those 15 years, in real terms, property prices in Aberdeen are significantly less than where they were in 2007. The other two underperformers, although they're in pink, they are actually positive. So Glasgow average price up 32%, Newcastle prices up 25%. So those are the trends according to Home Track. This is the other bit of data I want to show at you. This is actually more relevant. It's actually from February. This data shows the strongest growth locations in terms of buoyancy in the market. So this is where you would want to be a property developer, because this is where your stock is shifting the quickest. So currently, Glasgow, Plymouth, Bristol, Stockport, Edinburgh, these are the hottest locations in terms of time on market with a property with an agent. What is interesting is when you look at this set of data, and this is the top 20 out of 420 locations around the UK, you can see that it is literally a splatter of the whole of the UK, from north to south, from east to west. There is no one specific regional trend. This is a whole smattering of locations where property transactions, the speed in which property sells, is the most buoyant. And I can honestly say I've never ever recall seeing Middlesbrough and Stockton-on-Tees in a report of this type, which just shows just how much this the billions that have been put into the economy, which has flown through into the housing market, has impacted on residential values. Unsurprisingly, the 20 worst locations are all in London, with the single exception of Aberdeen. So every single location where property is sticking the longest and slowest to sell, they are all in a London locations. Right, rentals. Obviously, data should always be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt. And these are the rental trends over the last 12 months. So this is annual growth in average rents, and it's from Home Track. So rental turnaround from over 12 months. So average rents in Belfast up 10.9%. Average rents in Nottingham 10.6%, blah, blah, blah. Of course, with London in particular, it's all very well talking about data on a 12-month trend, but what you've got to remember is in 2020, we had a very substantial downturn in average rents, particularly in London and Birmingham, because of the exodus of people, and also because of the supply increase from people who found themselves with serviced accommodation that had no demand, so they put those properties into the AST market, and that added to what was already a difficult situation. So anecdotally, some London boroughs saw rent declines in 2020 of 25 to 30%. And of course, so this data that you're seeing there is to some extent only making up for what was lost, but it's an average, and obviously London is a very big place, 32 boroughs, etc. But that's the current data for rental trends. Whether it's reflected in your own experience, I can't comment. London, as just talk about London, the difference between what's happening in Dagenham and in East London is very different to what's happening in Mayfair and Knightsbridge. So just summarising what I've just said there, the current house prices and the trends reflect what's been happening with all of the injection of financial support, but it is spread evenly across the UK. Typically, after any downturn, such as we had in the early 90s and then in the mid in 2008, 2009, when you get the upturn, you get a ripple. It starts in London, it ripples outwards, and generally the likes of the northeast, the likes of Barrow in Furness up on the northwest, the likes of the South Wales valleys, these are the locations where they're the last to benefit from any economic upturn because of the ripple effect. But of course, COVID has literally thrown a bit of a spanner in the works because the digital confetti has been splattered all over the country, if you take my drift. And typically in any ripple, it's 5 to 10 years before the likes of Barrow in Furness and Merthyr Tydfil experience growth in a more buoyant economy than from London. London and the inner southeast tends to be the first part to recover. So what you've got to ask yourself now when you look at these price trends that we're seeing currently is how much of these prices in the regions is part of the belated recovery, and is it going to continue? As always, focus and follow the money is what I will say. It's my Property Investor News. We devote 4 pages in the magazine to planning development approvals, just to follow the money, to show locations that are getting big regeneration monies or new transport schemes. So I just want to talk about a couple of things for people to think about in the current market, because there's a lot of speculation as always, but it seems to be at the moment, you know, we've had a boom, post-COVID boom, or since post the first lockdown. This is absolutely crystal clear, and I've got, you know, first-hand evidence from my own experiences of seeing this. So I thought I'd put this slide up, and this is one of my own properties in North London. It's a long-term hold. I've had this one a long time, and I bought it in 1987. I paid 85 for it. Now, it was valued in mid 2007, so it was 15 years ago. It was valued at 380, which was the peak of that cycle. Now, then the downturn occurred, and in mid 2009, it was probably around 350. So that was the low point of that cycle. Now, the reason I'm using this slide is to draw, you know, draw out something for people to think about. So next door, the neighbouring unit sold for 330, and I spoke to the owner at the time, and I said, you know, what are you doing? I knew the lady. She worked for Halifax. She sold a property for 330, which about a year and a half earlier would have sold for at least 400,000. And I said, why are you doing that? And she said, well, I'm moving to a larger property, and although I'm selling for less, I'm buying for less. From her point of view, now 15 years on, that property probably will be at least 750, if not 800. The one that she sold, but the one that she bought, which was a 4-bedder from memory, that would be 950. So she would probably argue, if she were on this call with us today, that was a smart move from her. Just turning to the future, looking at the marketplace, I am not Harry Potter. I don't have a crystal ball. What I would say is that, you know, typically I'm not one to follow what we see at some exhibitions from people that are selling property that will always say property doubles in value every 10 years. It can do, it has done in certain, you know, in certain parts of the country in recent years. But I would say perhaps, you know, notwithstanding what might be happening with inflation, which is the big thing at the moment, obviously, if we do get over the next 10 years a 50% increase in the average value of the average property, then if bank rate stays relatively low, and when I talk about bank rate relatively low, I'm talking bank rate at between the current expectations of being between 2 and 3% maximum, then pretty much that's going to equal a really good return. And I'll explain why my thoughts are on that in a minute. And, you know, skills are going to be key: access to deals, planning uplifts, blah, blah, blah. The other thing, of course, is we may get a downturn in next year, 2-3 years. I don't know what would precipitate it. There are a number of things that you could put into the mix. If it does, then obviously that could be a real buying opportunity for those that have still got the appetite to buy. Let's just go back to that slide I used here about the one in North London. I just want to talk about the principle behind this is, if you bought a £100,000 property at 75% mortgage, and your equity at start was £25,000, after 10 years, if that property rises in value to 150, your equity is now 75 instead of 25. Your loan to value is 50%. Your gearing is lower. Your risk is lower. You've got a lot more equity in it. But of course, the increase in the value is nominal, and this is really a term that we need to be thinking about: nominal to real. In other words, nominal is not adjusting for inflation. But the great thing about property and leveraging, gearing with property when you're buying it and using mortgage debt, is that your debt in real terms is reduced because of inflation. So to some extent, as long as the increases in property values follow inflationary trends, they don't always, let's be said, I'm not, but the great thing is if you stay in the game, you're rewarded for that. So I'm pretty sure all of you will be aware of this, but I thought it was worth just throwing this into the mix for just to think about. So that what we've seen on the supply side is more blocks being built, not just in the student sector. Build to rent is the term. Purpose-built blocks for private rental sector tenants. Nearly all of these are being targeted at your young professionals. I think there's one going to go up in Hove in the next 2 or 3 years, 650 units on a site there in Hove. Large blocks, purpose-built. This trend for purpose-built rental accommodation has been going for quite some time now, since about 2004. And despite all of the publicity about build to rent, there's still only 73,000 units completed. And they are primarily targeting the major cities. They're primarily targeting the higher income, top quartile renters, tenants. For you as landlords, the key question, of course, is, are these your competition? If they're not, then just keep an eye and carry on and crack on with what you're doing. But when I look at what these blocks are doing, there are some things for us to learn and take note of, even if they're not currently your competition. What a customer experience and facilities can you offer in comparison to what some of these guys are? I equate it to, these are the Marriotts, these are the Holiday Inns, these are the large hotels. You're running a small boutique or a group of small boutique hotels. What can you offer that your customers will value, and also at what rental price point? Quick couple of comments on the HMO market and the challenges in the current market. I'm not going to talk about the regulatory side, the compliance side, because you'll all be well aware of this through the work that iHouse do in terms of reporting and letting you guys know about all of the government regulations and the impact, etc. But clearly HMOs can give you a higher income gross, but they are higher maintenance. They do require more intensive management. To create new HMOs now is more difficult than it was a few years ago. Lots of EU workers have gone back and haven't come back. So we've got increasing supply of labour shortages, skilled labour for bricklayers, carpenters, etc., which means that wage increases are in the build sector are really kicking in. If you've got a really good builder, then you should actually be nurturing that relationship as best you can, because you may find it difficult to get another one anytime soon that'll do the job properly. Obviously, because of various factors, we're seeing big increases in material costs. We at the magazine, Property Investor News, we've had 2 substantial increases in paper prices from our...
We seem to have lost Richard just temporarily, just hopefully we'll get him back in a moment. So we were just having a general chat then about the situation, particularly in Brighton. Jenny was saying that she's finding that that rents are dropping, particularly in the student market in Brighton.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's all very well me, putting up data, which is at a national level or a regional level, but it's always the niches. There's no question that Brighton's one of these locations which, on the student accommodation side, has seen rising supply impact. The article that I was touching on was more about the the future. Can you see?
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
It was the article that I was talking about. It was more about the national trend, about demographics and how it's going to impact on the broader student numbers. But of course, every location is very different. Like I said, we're talking about London, at a general level. So whilst the comments that I'm making clearly are not applicable to Brighton at this moment in time, perhaps there's some hope that if you are a specialist in the student accommodation sector market, that you might see a more positive environment in a year or two's time, particularly once we get through the COVID period, and also overseas students as well coming back. If it's a university that has a strong number of overseas students, Brighton, say I don't know the specifics of the student accommodation market demographic for Brighton, But if a lot of the students are coming from China, for example, where there's been obvious problems getting people come over in the last few years, then that may well turn around. But yeah, I hope what I've just said makes sense.
Okay, so do you want to just finish off the last?
Yeah, just finish off. I've just got a few more to finish. So just on this theme of commercial property, just run through you a case study what we ran in the magazine a year ago, and this actually is in I think it's in George Street in Hove, location you will know, and this was the commercial conversion of a former bank building by a local developer that actually used to specialize in the student accommodation market, and they shifted to doing projects for young professionals and sort of what are called worker tenants. So this was split. So it was a ground floor bank. It was split into 2 units. I'll show you the floor plan in a minute. They bought it for 582. In total, they spent 883, including the refurbishment cost of 268,000. And the valuation came up at 1.3. So obviously a fairly healthy margin there between the cost and the end value of around 400,000. The commercial income was only half that from the previous occupant bank, but it was split into 2 units. So from memory, they got 30,000 on the commercial units, whereas previously NatWest, I think it was, were paying 60, which just shows the transition away from high street banking and the consequences for commercial landlords. But 90,000 is the income stream. 4 flats was the conversion. And a gross yield of 10.185%. If you look at the previous slide, you'll see that in the roof space above, there was no usage then. But if you look now on the bottom right, this is obviously before the project was actually completed. But what they did was to go up into the roof space and create rooms up there. This is the floor plan, and so this sort of on the right you'll see this extra roof space level, so where they were able to create a mezzanine floor in each one. The slide on the left is the way that the 2 ground floor units were split. So this was the dividing line, whereas previously this was one big banking hall and offices and what have you. It split into 2 commercial retail units. And this is on the first floor. So this is the way that the 4 flats were created on that first floor. It's quite a deep building, goes back quite a long way. And they also did some work at the back from memory to create extra space at the back here. But in order to get 4 full flats into this, that meant going up into the roof space. And yes, I mean, obviously from a financial point of view, pretty strong numbers and a good project. Why were they able to do this? Through understanding permitted development, through understanding the nuances of planning, and as I keep saying to people, the detail really matters. 20 years ago you could pin a tail, put a needle in a donkey or whatever, and it was easy to make money from residential property investment. Now it's a lot more complex, and the detail really matters. Planning uplift. Okay, just one last slide, just mentioning about on planning. We did another project case study in the January magazine, looking at a project up in North London. I knew the site very well. It was a former mission hall, a church, on a relatively small plot, but in a very good location. And next to Whetstone Police Station up in Totteridge, North London. And the developer there got a piece of land and created 20 flats through very creative use of planning, permitted development. And it's not permitted, it's a ground up building. And they added 10 million of value. Obviously that's not 10 million of profit, but they genuinely added 10 million of value by taking it from 9 units up to 20. through some creative use of the planning system, and that was in the January magazine. Just to finish off, we've got one upcoming in either the May or June magazine, where a good long-standing contact of mine in Oxfordshire, he's absolutely struck gold with a planning approval for a field, or a series of fields, to be fair, 25 acres in total. And this scheme is being done in 2 phases. He's now got 15.5 acres through full planning. He paid £1 million cash for this part of a farm on the outskirts of Oxford. And you're looking at probably 125 million gross development value. He's got planning for 155 houses on the first part of the scheme. And if you understand Oxford house prices, you'll realise that that's pretty much a scheme we'd all like to put our sticky fingers on. I don't think he's going to build it. He's going to sell it on. Now he's got planning. He'll make a very, very healthy profit on that 1 million. So that's my talk, Peter. Sorry about the technical glitches. Obviously, Property Investor News is my magazine. If you want to subscribe, click on my email, let me know, or just go onto our website here, Property Investor News, as the URL there, and subscribe. It's £8.95 a month by direct debit. And that's my talk. Hope it was useful.
No, thank you very much. That's extremely useful. So I think it's opened, opened people's eyes. Do you want to stop your sharing, Richard? Oh no, leave that up. Leave that up. Then people can see your details. So
yeah,
that's not a problem at all. So we're having a bit of a chat while you disappeared. As you quite rightfully point out, things do vary considerably from one area to another. So it's very much, as you already said, about doing your research and understanding your market, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Brighton is not alone. There's locations like Coventry that have seen a substantial amount of student accommodation saturation.
Yeah.
In the HMO particular sector, lots of landlords that have, to be blunt, have done well for years now have been struggling really badly. Partly, just too much supply relative to demand, and that is unfortunately lots of. I mean, the banking sector, same. There's it's change, and obviously the key for any entrepreneur is to understand that change is ongoing, that change can happen. Stuff like COVID comes along, stuff like the financial crash comes along, stuff like Brexit comes along, and it has an impact. And unfortunately, as with anybody who was in the theatre industry, who was in the events sector a couple of years ago, some businesses actually did very, very well during COVID. Others got hit really badly.
It's all about adapting, as you say, and understanding what you could do, what's going on. And when I do training, when I'm talking to people, I do say we're not expecting another lockdown, but if we get one, can you manage? Because the first time round, everyone had the excuse, well, we weren't expecting it. But there's a possibility of another lockdown, and you do your visits and your inspections, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple of properties at the moment that tenants are resisting access. So in fact, I was going, it's absolutely classic. Why is it tenants always wait for the day or two before a bank holiday to notify you about a boiler problem or whatever?
Well, it's the joys of being a landlord, Richard,
yeah.
So whereas I know a lot of newspapers think that we're all multi-millionaires and swan around doing nothing all day long.
Yeah.
As you say, it's comments like that. Right, look, we've had our hour, so thank you so much for doing that, Richard. Very much, interesting what you have to say there. So I hopefully everyone found it interesting. As I've already mentioned, Richard talked there about some changes in planning. We've got the talk coming up in Southampton, and that we're going to be talking about So it's just ready to go. I'll stop your sharing.
Yeah,
So that's right. I've done it. So don't worry.
okay.
Yeah, so we've got a guy there talking about some of the changes with permitted development, and you'd be surprised what you can do now. Absolutely amazed what you can do now. So it's well worth coming along to that if you can make it. So, all right, Richard, thank you so much for that, and I'm glad that we eventually overcome the gremlins. So.
I'm getting, my next call is going to be getting onto BT to find out what's going on with the Wi-Fi. It may well be far too many local school children that are on school holidays, spending far too much time streaming videos. That might be something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, always blame the school children. That's
anyway, listen, all of you at iHouse, the old SPLA, etc. Good luck, and yeah, take care.
All right, okay. Thank you very much, and goodbye, one and all. See you very soon. Okay, bye for now. Bye.